Chapter 4. The 1st of May. We have nearly finished the bridge floor, but we must abandon this work for the garden. Father is planting corn. 2nd. A sour, chilly day. Stayed indoors. 3rd. We finished the bridge floor in time for the Adams to be first across it. They brought with them a paper with news about the great permanent bridge in Philadelphia. Sarah did not come with them. Yesterday was the birthday of new pigs at the Adams. 4th. A splendid day. Went to the Adams to see the pigs. Sarah looked very well. We certainly might wonder if Noah went to the Adamses to see the new pigs or to see Sarah. He didn't remark about the pigs, but Sarah seemed to look very well. One of the satisfactions of working with wood is the ability to split it expertly. If you season or dry wood properly and place a wedge in the right place, you can split shingles or rails or boards from it with a single good blow. Such a cut might take hours if tried with a saw. Splitting. Planks in 1805. Iron bands with a glut and beetle of ironwood. Here, said Isaac, is a saw for cutting across the ends of the boards. You do that while I split the logs into planks. Axes were too valuable ever to be used as hammers. Even now a good woodsman will never hammer a wedge with the head of an axe when there is a sledgehammer to do the job. Isaac's hammer was made of hardwood. Even his wedges were made of hardwood. They were known as gluts. Do we nail the boards down soon? Asked Noah. No, said his father. The trick is just to lay them down loosely so they don't warp. Then you place a roadway going the opposite way across the top. Nails would only split boards and rust the cracks into rot. Loose boards weather best. I know, said Noah, that a good carpenter doesn't use nails unless he has to. I just forgot. If we can do it, said Isaac, with some pride in his voice, we will finish this bridge without the use of iron at all. Not even one nail will be used. Just as the last floorboard was laid down, a shout sounded from on top of the trail, and Mr. Adams came into view, his son Robert close behind him. It is beautiful, they called out. May we be the first visitors across? Welcome, said Isaac. This will call for a celebration. We shall let you cross even before the crossboards are done with, and then we shall all go to the house for hot tea. Rachel had seen them coming, and the tea was ready by the time they arrived. At the house, Mr. Adams brought out a copy of the latest Philadelphia newspaper, which he said would be of the greatest interest to Isaac. The newspaper was a single folded sheet. All newspapers and even letters were single sheets of paper because you paid full postage for each sheet no matter how small or large, and the name of the paper was the Pennsylvania Packet and General Advertiser. Look here, said Mr. Adams, and you may read the latest news about the new permanent bridge over the Schuylkill. They are going to cover it over like a house. They say that any bridge with a cover on it will last twice as long as one without a cover. Mark my words, every wooden bridge in America will be adding a roof and sides before long. What about covering yours? Isaac read through the account silently and seriously. During the quiet, everyone pondered the new idea, and they had a mind's eye picture of how the new bridge would look with a house around it. I think it's a good idea, said Isaac. We can put the roof on it first, then we can add siding before the winter comes. I guess if those Philadelphia builders can have a covered bridge, we can have one too. Wow, howled Noah. What an idea. We can get out of the rain in it. Maybe we can even have windows in it. I suppose you'll want curtains too, added Rachel with a chuckle. Today, covered bridges are treated as a curiosity so antique that many of us believe that they began during the Revolutionary War or even before that. Yet until the Schuylkill Bridge added its covering, there were no covered bridges at all in America. Architectural plan and elevation of the Schuylkill P Bridge. Whole length, 550 feet. High water line, low water line. A. The frame before the covering. B. The cover. C. Surface of the rock at the bottom. D. Platform. The idea took over so quickly, however, it seemed that almost overnight all of our wooden bridges became covered and the famous early American covered bridge was born. The stories we may hear of how George Washington crossed over this or that covered bridge are, of course, untrue. The Blake covered bridge could have been the second one in America, as the Schuylkill Bridge put on its roof during the year 1805. By that time, Washington had died, so an American covered bridge was never even viewed by our first president. But, as this book is being written, there are still over 1,500 of these bridges left. 5th, first Sunday to pass across New Bridge to meeting. 6th, Father and I laid the cross planks upon the bridge. He says it will take a month before they become dry and lay right. It will be my chore to turn them over when they warp or bend. 7th, some of my peas are up, but spring is backward. 8th, help Father with stump pulling to enlarge the cornfield. Started plowing this evening. 9th, plowed all day, high winds from the west. 10th, took the day off and went into the woods looking for hoop wood. Found muskrat den. Will set snare soon. Both stump pulling and finding hoop wood were spring chores of early times. After the ground had heaved and settled when winter was done, roots were looser and the big tree stumps were then easier to pull out. The tough roots were almost impossible to burn, so farmers used to push them into a fence formation that wasn't very pretty to look at, but lasted for many more years than an ordinary fence. Even now in Canada and on some remote farms, you will find good root fences almost a century old. Noah helped his father with the stumps for a while, but with the help of Daniel the ox, Isaac found he could do the job alone, so Noah disappeared into the woods for an afternoon jaunt. He came back laden with an armful of newly cut poles. "What," exclaimed Isaac, "are you going to do with all of those?" Stump pulling was a man-sized job in 1805. Mallet lever, Daniel, Isaac, but the upturned stumps made long-lasting root fences. Root fence. "I guess you haven't heard about the new cooper in the village," replied Noah. "He told Robert and me that he could use all the good hoop wood that we can supply him with. Robert and I shall keep a supply soaking in a bank over in Indian Brook Meadow. Then whenever we go to the village and need a bit of spending money, we shall pick up a bundle of hoop wood and sell it to Mr. Miner. He's the new cooper. In May, when black ash and hickory are alive with new sap, 6-foot poles were cut from the saplings in the swamplands. After a good soaking, the poles were pounded soft and rived or cut into strips for making barrel hoops. You just pounded the softened wood strip around a barrel, and when it dried, you had a hoop that was as hard as iron and even outlasted metal. 6-foot hoop poles were cut in spring and soaked in water for a while, held down by a rock. The pin money crop, pounded soft with a mallet, then split into strips, and used for hoops by coopers to make barrels and pails. See how the hoops held the staves together? A maple bucket, the buttonhole lock, a water pail, and these were the lock laps used, the arrow point lock, bark left on. 11th, rain, split shingle wood for a roof on the new bridge. 12th, Sunday, Sarah walked home from meeting with me to admire the new bridge. I walked back with her. 13th, a sour day, worked indoors again splitting wood. 14th, rain again. Brook ran high, but the new bridge is much higher than flood level. 15th, saw a flock of bluebirds. There are blossoms on the pea vine in the garden. Warm day. 16th, dew. During the spring rains, farmers found time for doing indoor chores such as repairing equipment or splitting firewood under cover. Noah seems to have found lots of time for splitting shingles and firewood during this rainy spring week. Few of us today would think of wood splitting as anything but a tedious chore, but when one learns to do it well, there is a certain joy involved. Striking your axe in an exact spot, watching a log divide miraculously into segments and squares with single blows, or even learning to stack a simple pile of wood correctly gives pleasure to the art of woodsmanship. Noah's diary doesn't mention what tool he used to split shingles with, but we know it must have been a furrow. This was a heavy knife blade attached to a handle and struck on the top with a maul, or heavy club. If you take any 2 or 3 foot pine or cedar log and let it dry for a year, it needs only a furrow to divide it nicely into a dozen or so fine shingles. Some secrets and joys in the fine arts of working in the woodshed. With springy wood like unseasoned elm, splitting is difficult. Your axe will just wedge its head into the middle of the log. But just chop at the sides instead of the center and watch it split. Stacking cordwood so it will not fall down. Crisscross stacks at both ends. Forked sticks. If you will notice in the large drawing of the Blake place in 1790, the house had a bark roof. Bark roofs were easier to make in a hurry, and as shingle material had to be dried for a year or more before splitting, we might assume that proper wood shingles were added to the Blake place a year or so later. Riving shingles used to be known as grandfather's favorite pastime, for it was a man's chore that could be done while sitting down. 17th. Father and I took Daniel in the wagon to Mr. Beach's to collect our mill wheel. It is beautiful. It weighs over 2 tons. 18. We rolled the mill wheel over the new bridge, which did not sag an inch. Shingles were ribbed with a froe by striking it with a maul. Here is a cooper's froe for making barrel staves. Log to be split, held in place by a crotch chopping block. Good wood warms you thrice. When you cut it and when you burn it, the embers warm your soul. 19th, Rog, Sunday. After meeting, we all walked our boundaries, met the Adams doing the same. Rog Sunday, as Noah put in his diary, meant Rogation Sunday, which was the day when farmers looked to their land and crops and prayed for a bountiful harvest. On this day, the clergyman and his flock walked through the village and out into the fields to bless the planted ground. In the evening on Rogation Sunday, farmers and their families walked the boundaries of their property. It was both inventory and time for giving thanks for their land. At points along the way, some boy of the family group was bumped against a marker tree or a boundary stone, or he was ducked into whatever pond or stream marked the boundary. It was all in good fun, and the bumping or ducking was accompanied by a small gift to the boy. In this way, he well remembered the boundaries of the land which he would someday fall heir to. The Adams family met with the Blakes as both families were walking the boundaries of their land. Noah spotted the Adamses first, probably because he was so eager to see Sarah. "Hi there," he yelled. "Over here are some markers. I guess we are right on the line." "We've bumped Robert on 2 trees already," called out Mr. Adams. "Have you been bumped yet, Noah?" Noah felt he was too old for such childish customs, but just to join in the fun and perhaps to delight Sarah, he allowed himself to be bumped against a pile of marker stones, and it was Sarah who awarded him with a package of sweet cookies. After Rogation Tide walk and before the sun had set, the Adams family went back with the Blakes to view the new mill wheel. "What a fine wheel!" exclaimed Mr. Adams. "It should give you extraordinary power." "Yes," said Isaac. "It is an overshot wheel, and they say that they are most efficient. With it we can keep the water power locked up in the mill pond till we want to use it. Even when the stream ceases to flow, we can still have water for the mill. The first thing I shall attach to the wheel will be a bellows for the forge, then perhaps a drop hammer and a wood saw, or maybe a device for grinding linseed oil." "And what about a grist mill?" asked Rachel. "I am tired of buying meal from town or grinding it in my ancient quern." "Yes," said Isaac. "Your quern shall go to Indian Tom, who has so often admired it, and I shall put in a small grist mill just for you." Everyone looked at the big wheel as it sat resting on the far end of the new bridge, and they imagined the wonderful things it would someday do. But to Isaac, who had to do most of the work, the stone foundations and the mill house with its final machinery seemed a long way off. But things were beginning to shape up. There was the new bridge for hauling materials across. There was a fine new water wheel ready to go to work. There was the pond, and there was the sluice box ready to lead water from the pond to the wheel. The quern was a simple hand mill. Grain was poured through a hole in the upper millstone, ground against a lower stone, and thrown outward to fall as meal. Lower stationary stone. Rachel swings the quern stick to turn the upper millstone. As with all backcountry places, the Blake homestead was near a spring of running water. A well had been made only after the house had been completed. By the year of Noah's diary, the old stream used both for washing and drinking water, marked watering place on the 1790 drawing, had been diverted into a pond and a real well had been dug. If you look at the second after 1805 drawing, you will see the well and well sweep at the upper right corner. "We'll build a sweep," Isaac had said, even before we had finished the well, and you'll probably want to know why. Well, the reason is simple. It will be an easy way to lift out the earth as I dig it away. That will be your job, Noah. And so a crotch tree was found, and a big spruce sweep was pinioned into the crotch. Another spruce pole hung from the sweep tip, and a bucket was hung from that. The butt end of the pole was so heavy that it lifted the bucket up, even with water or earth in it, and it was always easier to pull that sweep down by your own natural weight than it would be to pull the loaded bucket up using your strength instead of your weight. With the well finished, a pond became the new project. We might presume that building a pond took a year or two, but nature takes over quickly, and within a short time after any pond is designed, you will find frogs and fish and weeds and water snakes all appearing miraculously as if the pond had always been there. In the days of water power, each kind of mill wheel had its own kind of power. First there was the tub mill, run by impact of a mountain waterfall. Then the undershot wheel near waterfalls and its swift water running year-round. The breast wheel, combining impact and gravity to turn it. and the overshot wheel, fed by a mill pond and sluice. Mill pond. This overshot type wheel was run completely by gravity, the weight of water. See how a very little flow of water builds up enough weight to turn that heavy wheel? We'll have to dam up a mill pond and build a sluiceway. Of course, the object of the pond was to eventually feed the mill to be in during off hours and rainy days. Isaac and Noah had worked on building the wooden sluice, which would carry the pond water down to the mill and then, by the water's weight, turn the wheel. It was the sluice box that first gave American designers the idea for the canal, for on some of the farms, men made wooden canal-like boxes with water in them, and by floating long narrow boats in these sluices, heavy loads would be carried easily from the barn to the road, from a mine to the smelter, or from the forest to the sawmill. By the 1800s, and just before the locomotive came into being, America had really become canal-minded, and everything went from town to town by canal boat. Here's how the well sweep helped to build the dug well. Drop pole, added rock weight, Isaac, and here is the new well with Rachel, lowering the bucket. Even today, we still say that we ship things from town to town, although now it really goes by railroad or truck. And even now, if you look carefully, you will see evidence along many highways that there was once a canal. Most of our railroads were built along the tow path of old canals where the mules once walked to pull canal boats. The actual canal, long since dry, will still be seen running along one side of the railroad tracks and still acting as good drainage for rainwater. Even farmers had their private little canals for hauling heavy loads. A sluice filled with water, a cargo boat floating in it. 20th, showers. 21st, dew. 22nd, dew. 23rd, Father and Mr. Beach started on the mill, foundation. 24th, I helped at the mill site, began a plumping mill for Mother. Mother, said Noah, I have a surprise for you. Come down to the millbank and see what I have begun. I know that Father promised to attach a grain mill to his water wheel for you, but I think I've beat him to it. I am making you a real plumping mill. Rachel was eager to see Noah's invention. Even as she neared the bank where her husband and Mr. Beach were hard at work with the drywall foundations, she could hear the steady sound of plumping. When she reached the bank, she saw it. It may be slow, explained Noah, but it will work on and on all by itself. I guess it might pound out a full measure of meal in about half an hour. Father says when he gets his water wheel in place, I can use just the spray from it to make my mill work. Using merely the overflow and leakage from the sluice, Noah's mill had a little box that filled with water every now and then. When it filled, the added weight lifted a big hammer like an object at the other end. As soon as this went up, the box emptied itself so the hammer lost balance and fell down into a hollowed mortar log with a resounding thud. It works fine, called out Isaac from the other bank. I guess we have a pretty clever son. Takes after his father, all right, he added with a chuckle. At this point, the bridge is up. The mill house is planned. The sluice box is built. Sluice to pond. Isaac is building the stonework, Mr. Beach. And here's Noah's pumping mill, which works like this. 1. Water falls into box. Mortar, hardwood mallet or pestle. 2. Pestle rises as water box waits and spills. 3. Spilled out box rises, and pestle bangs into grain mortar. The mill wheel is ready to install here. Pumping mill, Noah, Rachel. Isaac Blake, you can go right back to your mill building, replied Rachel with a twinkle in her eye. You can saw wood or grind linseed, or pump a bellows, or mix snuff with your old mill for all I care. Noah and I have our own mill. If you are real good and polite to us, we might just let you have some of our good cornmeal. Rachel knew how her husband had wanted for a long while to build himself a mill for sawing wood and to do other mechanical jobs. After all, she really didn't mind grinding the small amount of meal needed for a family of 3, but still she must have been proud of her son's new invention. When I get it in place, said Noah, I'll carve my initials and date into it, and your initials too, Mother, for it shall be your mill. In modern times, when everything a person needs may be bought in a store, there are very few handmade things left, so we are robbed of that rare and wonderful satisfaction that comes with personal accomplishment. In Noah's time, nearly every single thing a person touched was the result of his own efforts. The cloth of his clothing, the meal on the table, the chair he sat in, and the floor he walked upon, all were made by the user. This is why those people had an extraordinary awareness of life. They knew wood intimately. They knew the ingredients of food and medicines and inks and paints because they grew it and ground it and mixed it themselves. It was this awareness of everything about them that made the early American people so full of inner satisfaction, so grateful for life and all that went with it. Nowadays, modern conveniences allow us to be forgetful, and we easily become less aware of the wonders of life. We are apt to ponder why almost everything of the old days was initialed and dated. It was simply because almost everything was made by the one who initialed it. The date was added because everyone was so completely aware of the times in which he lived. Any boy would certainly put his name and the date on a mill he had designed himself, and Noah was no exception. 25th. Father and Mr. Beach at sawing. 26th. Rained all day. Set the saws with father and later went fishing. 27th. I took Mr. Beach's place at the saw. He hurt his eye and is ill. We might argue as to what kind of saw Isaac and Mr. Beach used and what they were sawing, but it is most likely they were smooth sawing timbers for the wheel and gear housing, that place where the water wheel would turn a wooden gear on the big axle. This gear would then mesh with a larger gear and become the machine for doing whatever work Isaac wanted it to do. In those days, big square beams were either broad-axed from round logs or they were sawed into a square shape with a pit saw. Either the log being sawed was propped up so one of the sawyers could get under it, or the log was shoved across the pit in the ground with one man in the pit. In either case, the man on top had the more desirable job, for the man beneath was showered with sawdust at every stroke of the pit saw. Perhaps Mr. Beach hurt his eye by getting sawdust into it, which would indicate that he was a boxman or the man below, while Isaac worked from above as the tiller man. All the first saws were up and down sawmills, and the saw was like the framed pit saw shown in the drawing. The frame slid up and down just as a window sash does in its framing. In fact, the saw was held in a sash, and it slid up and down in a frame, and with little doubt our modern wooden window was designed from the old up and down sawmill's sash and frame. On the page opposite the pit saw drawing, you will see how later on the framed handsaw became mechanized. For a smaller saw, the workman's foot pushed the blade down and then it sprang back by itself by means of a springy sapling. An apprentice or helper student sometimes did this work for him. For rougher and heavier sawing, an apprentice turned a big wheel, or a horse entered the picture by working some kind of a treadmill, which in turn slid a saw back and forth as the drawing shows. 28th. Fruit trees are in full blossom, plowed today. The pit saw was either framed or open. Metal grasp, circa 1600 to 1815. Wedge, hickory sash, lower handle. Pit saws were from 4 to over 7 feet long. Tiller, teeth raked down, circa 1650 to 1900. Tillerman, boxman. Oak, lower handle or box made to slip off easily. 29th. Plowed. 30th. Rain set in again. Father is working under cover at the mill. 31st. Finished plowing. Signs of a few days of dry weather. Ash bow, saw sash, foot treadle, saw blade, pole saw. The foot treadle power was often substituted by a boy in a stall who pushed up and down. An early apprentice mill, used for ripping heavy stock, turned by hand. Guides. This later developed into the horsepower saw. Signs of a few days of dry weather can be good news to any farmer who has been walking about in mud for a whole week. These weather signs were what the old-time farmer looked for in the sky, the direction of the wind and the disposition of his cattle. Today we go about our business regardless of rain or shine, but not so long ago what we did the next day depended entirely upon the weather. When the roads were made of dirt, even the slightest rain often made carriage traffic out of the question. A round trip to town at 5 miles an hour might take all day, and part of the trip might even have to be made at night on dark roads, so people chose a time of month when the moon stayed fullest and the skies were clearest. Your almanac was your timetable. People now look upon almanacs as silly superstitious writings that dealt with the moon in a mystic way and predicted what the weather would be using witchcraft methods. Nothing could be more incorrect. Just as modern scientists use information about last year's storms and seasons and feed that information to electronic calculator machines, so did the old-time farmer keep daily weather accounts of the past and add them up year after year. Farm diaries and almanacs were the books which kept such records. Want to take your cattle on a 3-day trip to the market? Just open your almanac and see when the moon is fullest to make your night travel possible. Did your clock stop, and do you want to set it again? Just open your almanac and find out the minute of sunrise or sunset today. Want to start a boat trip to deliver your grain? Consult your almanac and find out what hour tomorrow's tide will be highest. And so it went. In the days where there were no telephones or even neighbors close by, your almanac was far from being a scrapbook of superstitions. It was an absolute necessity. Noah's signs of dry weather might have been some of those listed in his almanacs and which you might want to remember. Heavy dew at night means a fair dry day tomorrow. Halo around sun and moon means a lengthy slow rain within 8 hours. Smoke refusing to rise signifies oncoming storm. Increased odors of swamps, ditches, cellars warns of rain. Rolls of dark clouds under cobwebby sky warns of high winds. Bats and swallows fly near the ground before a rain.